Yes. You know I had to play a little bit of Outcast this morning to get us going, or this afternoon, I should say. I have Georgia on my mind all day today. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. But I want to welcome everybody to the very first Wednesdays at 1 show of 2021. Thank you so much for being here. And it's a special show. Let me just tell you, I have an incredible guest with me today. His name is John Karalis. Now, let me just tell you, when it comes to basketball, and specifically when it comes to the Boston Celtics, this guy does it all. He is a writer. He is a podcaster. And he has just released his very first book on the Boston Celtics. It's called The Boston Celtics All-Time All-Stars. I want to take this time to introduce you to Mr. John Karalis. John, are you with us?
I am with you. I love this.
John,
I'm going to do the show every week if you keep giving me introductions like that.
Well, you know what? This is what it's about, John. This is about letting people know that you are out here. Now, I was going back in my very faulty memory bank that resides up in here, and I know that we've known each other for at least, I'm going to say 20 years now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty close to that. I started at WBZ in 2001. That was. I started 2 days after 9/11. I walked into a buzzsaw at WBZ as the new overnight producer. I'll never forget that moment because obviously it's pure mayhem, complete chaos. I remember walking into the newsroom. Who was the news director at that time? Pete?
I think it was Peter. Yeah, Peter Brown.
Peter Brown. I remember being on one end of the newsroom as the new guy, supposed to be getting like 2 days to ease into everything. And now we're in the middle of a week long of 24/7 9/11 coverage. And he comes out of his office and he says, I need someone to watch CBS Network while we're on the air. And he scans the room and I'm 6'5", I'm standing on the other side of the room. No one's ever seen me before. And he goes, you can do that, right? And I was like, yeah, sure. Boom. Next thing you know, I spent the next 8 hours in the control room with headphones on, listening to Dan Rather, tapping producers on the shoulder saying, CBS just reported that. So that's my introduction to WBZ and to you.
Well, that's great that you that we met. I didn't know that story until right now, actually. So you saw me, the very first time you saw me, I was probably in the midst of having a physical and mental breakdown in the midst of 9/11 in that control room. If you remember that E&G room, what those days were like, it was pure mayhem. But I have to say, you get through that, which you did and which I did. If you get through that, basically you can handle anything that happens on the media landscape. That's my opinion. But in the moment, it's like, wow, we don't even know if we're going to have a world to come back to on any given day after this, but we were in it. We were really in it. And that's interesting. I didn't know that. But yeah, 20 years ago on 9/11, I'm sure I probably yelled or grunted or ran around, and
a lot of that from everybody.
probably didn't say, hello, nice to meet you, but that's the way that we met. So that's actually a great story. I didn't realize that until now. But that basically leads me into why I have you here. John, you have a couple of great aspects to your life. And so I'm wondering if you could, as a media coach, I'm always working with people who maybe have aspirations to do a lot of the things that you're doing now, even though they may not be in that spot right now. They may be working in a job, or they may have something that they're interested in, a hobby or something that they've really become like expert level, and they want to start maybe blogging, or they want to start doing stuff on video, or they want to curate a page, or become an influencer, become a thought leader. You've actually done that. So I'm wondering if you could just take the audience through your steps from, I know you went to Emerson and you ended up at BZ at a certain point, to where you are now.
Well, I mean, the brief overview of my career is that, I started in television. I went to Emerson College. Actually, I'll take it even a step further back. Why did I go to Emerson College? When I was in high school, I knew I liked to talk. I knew I liked to write, and I knew I liked sports. So my goal was to become like the next great sports center anchor. So I ended up going to Emerson College and getting a really great education, really hands-on stuff. I got into TV production, kind of like as a backdoor. My family, my parents were recently divorced. I felt like I really wanted to be home for my younger brother and my sister. And so I ended up staying in the New England area. I didn't want to bounce around. Usually when you want to get into television, you bounce around. You go to Iowa and North Carolina and places to cut your teeth and make mistakes. I ended up taking a production job and just kind of rolling with that. So it got me into WBZ eventually, but that passion for sports never kind of went away. And one day, Chuck McKenney, who you might remember there as one of our morning producers along with me, he was an Emerson College guy with me, and we kind of lost touch and reunited there at WBZ. We saw a Red Sox blog that we liked, and we decided to try to emulate that. And once we started the blog, it was called redsarmy.com, which still exists. Once we did that, the passion for actually talking about basketball just kind of rekindled and grew. And once I saw that this medium was available, I realized that, blogging, podcasting, stuff like that, social media had just started to really take off. That kind of stuff really showed me that there's a path for this. I didn't have to take that path of bouncing around the country to do this. I can build my own thing. And once I started to see the blog get popular, once I started to see the reach of podcasting, I really wanted to do that. And ultimately what ended up happening was I was basically too stupid to stop, as I like to put it. At every turn where most rational people kind of quit and said, I'm going to focus on something else, I never quit. And maybe that speaks to how much I wanted to do it. But even at its lowest points, even at my points where I was doing it on the side and it was just becoming too much, I kept telling myself, one more year to see if this catches on. And then, well, one more year. I compared to playing golf, where you hit one shot right down the middle of the fairway. And you're like, all right, that's why I'm going to keep on going. And when you should totally stop playing golf, you hit another shot and you're like, no, I'm going to keep on going. And ultimately that allowed me to continue to grow an audience. And, people started to actually believe what I had to say and think that
let me just interrupt you very quickly right there, because you make an incredible point, right, about what happens at the very beginning when nobody knows and nobody cares, and it's actually a lot of work. That's where a lot of people tend to fall off, in my opinion.
Yes.
Where they have this idea that they want to do this thing, and they don't realize how much real work there is and how little recognition you get, right? You pour your heart into writing out this blog, and you might get 10 people who read it, and 5 of those people are related to you, right?
Right.
So I admire that you kept going even then, because these are still early years. This is not when blogging was sort of like the vogue that it is now. This was well before everybody and their cousin was doing blogs.
Yeah, and let me tell you what's worse is when you pour your heart and soul into something and no one reads it, and then you put up something silly like a funny Photoshop or something like that, or you just make a joke or whatever, and that's what just goes like crazy, and you're like, wait a second, this was just something silly. This didn't mean anything. Or there's some trade rumor that was going nowhere, and people go nuts for that. But the 2,500 word piece that you deeply researched and put video clips on, and 10 people read that, and you're just like, well, what am I doing here? There's often no money involved in the beginning. There's no recognition. There is, and one of the things that I struggled with was I was not great at self-promotion. And so I was basically trying to say, here you go, world. Here's my content. Please like it for me. And not really telling people, hey, this is what I did. Take a look at it. It's almost like my 2-year-old nephew who keeps saying, Daddy, look, Uncle John, look, Mommy, look. And we all have like, fine, what? What is it? What is it? And that's kind of what you have to do, is to tug on everybody's coattails and shirt tails. Hey, look at this thing that I wrote. Look at this video that I produced. So that's one of the things. I guess it does speak to the passion, because you hear athletes tell us the same stories. I mean, I always say that what we do is very similar to what athletes do, in that there's limited spots for people to do it. It takes a lot of hard work, and a lot of it goes unrecognized until you reach a certain level. You just have to keep doing it. There's something that tells athletes, these basketball players, that I took 100 jump shots, I got to take 100 more. Where most people will be like, that's good. A lot of people quit early on in this process because they just can't take it. And maybe that naturally weeds some people out. But like I said, I was too stupid to get weeded out, I guess. I kept on going.
Well, that speaks to your passion. And I know now, today, when we look at the John Karalis brand and its footprint, you have some great reach. You have some great engagement. You have, I mean, people quote Red's Army, right? People know Red's Army. People know John Karalis, and you mentioned before, right? You're this 6'5" guy, and if I remember correctly, back in the day when we would sometimes get together and play a little basketball, he's a 6'5" guy. I'm going to tell you guys, he's a bucket, right? Athletic, tall, good footwork, good fundamentals, and you can't coach 6'5", right? So,
right.
But that's an aside. What I really want you to tell people is talk about. This is true. This is true. I just want to bring this up quickly. Our friend Clay Wadman, John has the best analogies, right? And I think that is something that you can draw on. And I say this to people that I coach, right? Take your natural strengths. Take whatever it is you're good at and double down on that, right? Don't start writing a blog and then, think that because I started this blog, tomorrow I'm going to be Red's Army, right? Red's Army was really, really, really just sort of, something that was like a passion project for you until it finally caught on. So, sort of be yourself, but continue on. And one of the things you do great is have these great analogies. And even Clay here says, I've never seen John in person. He can stand up straight on, can he stand up straight on camera?
You are a model.
Well, we don't need to, we're not.
I got my WNBA shirt on for in celebration, but I can't stand up because I'll knock everything over.
No, we have you framed just right. So why don't we have you stay there, and maybe that'll be for another day. But what I wanna ask you, because this is so interesting, your journey. You're describing your journey, but I think what people don't realize too is that the journey you never really get to the destination. And I'm gonna ask you, you didn't know I was gonna ask you this, but you had kind of a moment just this week while doing a press conference, a post-game press conference after a Celtics game, where you asked a question, and the person you asked the question to says, "Well, John, you know this stuff. This is I know your work. So from me knowing your work, I know you know this stuff." Could you just describe that scenario a little bit for the people?
Yeah, sure. So the reason I posted that, I'm definitely one of the people with this imposter syndrome, right? Like you're saying all of these things about me, and like I'm sitting there in my head, I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. And so when I'm sitting here talking to the Celtics and Brad Stevens, and I'm just some dude, I'm just some guy, I never feel like I belong. It's just a thing. And so, but Brad Stevens does this from time to time because they know who we are. They know all of our histories. He said it like on the first day I was covering the team. He said something similar. But yeah, I asked him a question about whether he could tell if the team was going to come out flat or not ahead of time. And that's when he says, John, you know the game, you've played. And it's true. Like a lot of times I ask questions knowing that like I feel like I know the answers, but I also don't want to overstate who I am. I think that's the other thing. Like my analogy for this is that when it comes to basketball, I'm like a high school science teacher. And I can teach people a lot of the basics and stuff. I can help you build that volcano that erupts and all of that stuff. NBA people, they're theoretical physicists. You know, they're the Stephen Hawkings of the world. They understand that, oh yeah, you know a little bit of science, you know what this is, but they are also at such a different level that I wouldn't dare compare myself to what they do, what they know, just because they live it every single day. The terminology, the speed, the level of talent, the things that you can get to. These guys are geniuses at basketball, all of them. And so it was a great moment for me because that was an acknowledgement. And I know that I need to be better about accepting that, you know, John, you are, you know basketball, you've played, you've been there, you've done this. Just my difference from NBA players is I certainly couldn't run as fast or jump as high, but I didn't play it long enough to learn a lot of the things that they've learned as far as the deep knowledge. But a lot of these things that a lot of people ask about and a lot of the universal things about basketball, I have experienced. And so I do feel like I have to be better about advocating for myself. And I think that's true of a lot of creatives. I think a lot of us, we put things out into the world. We spend our whole lives, Eric, trying to get people like, 0 F's given is like the goal for all of our lives. Like I try very hard to get to that point where I don't care what anybody thinks about me, my life, my decision, my choices. That's me. But yet every day I'm creating things and going, please like this. So it's a real interesting dichotomy that plays on your psyche in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. No, that is a really great point. The idea of imposter syndrome, the idea that, wait a minute, this was something that I had formulated in my mind, and now I'm out in the real world kind of testing the theory in real time with real people. And when you get that little sort of flash of recognition from someone like Brad Stevens, that has to feel incredible. That has to make all of the struggles really worth it.
Yeah, it certainly does. It's validation, but like real validation, and not like I got 100 retweets validation. Like that stuff that's fleeting. That's empty calories. That's McDonald's. Getting something, the acknowledgement, and not just like he said something nice. It's this knowledge that he knows my story. And so he just casually was like, So that was a nice little kind of like boost that it's a sign of respect from a person that I respect for reaching the highest level of his profession and being a part of the NBA. Like, I'm a part of the NBA. Like, I didn't make it as a player, but I made it to the NBA through the media side. And that's, like I said, it's hard to advocate for myself. And I feel like the athlete in me has always been at odds with this notion of the media person in me, because I've always been taught to never be satisfied. And once I feel like, I made it, I'm in the NBA, that's when everything falls apart, because then the drive is gone. Then the desire to do new things is gone. The creativity is gone. And that's not a place where I want to be. So it's in a lot of ways, I fight the imposter syndrome, but I also invite it in a lot of ways, because that feeling of me not belonging, constantly makes me want to do things to belong. And that's something that drives a creative process that hopefully innovates something, whether it's a segment in a podcast or the way I write or the questions that I ask. I never want to feel completely secure and happy with who I am or what I do, because I feel like that means the end of what I am and what I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, to that point, let me ask. We have a question. John, what do you think of changes in reporting from when you started compared to now, especially with the growth of blogs and independent reporters and so forth, right? That's really sort of right up your alley.
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I did learn a lot. I went through training. I went through media ethics trainings as part of my college education. And I think one problem with a lot of independent journalists is that the notion of ethics is lost to some degree. But at the same time, the independent journalists are not beholden to anybody. They're not part of a corporate media structure, which does have an influence. Like networks are
Well, it's
publicly
more than
traded.
influence, right? It's more than influence, though, isn't it? It's accountability, right? If you go out there and you were working for a newspaper or even a website, and you write something crazy or unfounded or mean or rude
Yep,
or just plain wrong, you're not going to have a job anymore. If you're just out there throwing stuff out into the universe
yep.
with no one looking over your shoulder and no regards for ethics or standards or sourcing, then that's a whole different. I mean, I can parse it because I've worked in media. I don't know that the average person out there knows the difference between an independent blogger who's saying a bunch of stuff and maybe someone who's adhering to those standards that we're talking about.
Yeah, and there's the bad side of it is all of the things that you just said. You know, the immediacy of the internet allows for people to go out and be outrageous, and human nature draws us to the outrageous. I mean, that's how Donald Trump rose to
Yes.
power. You know, that's we just constantly are looking at, in this din of like this beige din of noise, someone who stands out from that. You're like, ooh, who's that? And if that person, and that's why people are this way. That's why, look, Stephen A. Smith is a master at this. He's making millions of dollars of doing this, but he's outrageous for a reason. The sports talk radio people are outrageous for a reason. And people like me on the podcast who try to keep it simple and try to be entertaining while not being outrageous, we have our niche, but it is niche. It's not mainstream because a lot of people find that boring. So the desire to be outrageous, the necessity of being outrageous, it runs unchecked in independent, or it can run unchecked. I don't want to accuse every independent journalist of doing this. It can run unchecked. However, the good side of this is you don't have a corporate media structure telling you how you should approach things. There is a value to being independent, to not having a publicly traded company with millions of dollars and their number one priority being selling commercials, telling you this is the type of story we want to do. So there is
But John,
certainly that level.
it goes a little bit back to what you were saying though earlier, right? Where you, as the person adhering to all the standards and putting out your content, competing with people who are, kind of way over the top, right? Every once in a while, you may get a taste of that. You may either have like a controversial take or something that just resonates with people, and then you get a little taste of that rush, right? I
Yeah.
know I can tell you, for someone who puts on a show every Wednesday at 1, I love to look at my numbers, and when I see my numbers going up, I feel great about that. And I'm kind of like you a little bit in that I'm not sure why some shows get watched more than others. I think the only thing that I can do in response is just keep making shows, right?
Yeah.
But once you get a little taste of the hot take and the rush that goes along with that, I think that that's sort of the bait that people take. Oh, they responded to this. Let me one up myself, and then it just becomes this race to one up yourself, and that's not real. I don't know how much great content we're getting out of that. It may be sort of fun to look at and gawk at, but is that real content?
Well, that what you get in that is the constant flow of traffic, the rubberneck traffic. You know, you're the car
Right.
accident, and all of the people who are watching, they may be driving by, and it may not be the same people all the time, but you're still getting a bunch of people driving by and watching you. I think the most important thing here is, what's your motivation? What is your goal? Are you trying to be famous? Why are you doing this? Why are we putting shows together? Why am I doing a podcast? What's your ultimate goal? Is your ultimate goal to be famous? Then you're going to do things a certain way. My goal has never been to be famous. It's never been to have X amount of followers on social media. My goal has always been to talk basketball. My priority, my love is basketball. And I tell everybody, I love basketball, but almost in a different way than people who watch my stuff or listen to my stuff like basketball, because they like it as an entertaining sport, which it certainly is. They love the spectacle and the athletic ability and all of that stuff. I love basketball because of what it has meant to me. Basketball has given me this. I'm not sitting here talking to you without basketball. I don't write a book without it. I don't reach any sort of level of whatever you want to say that I am without basketball. Basketball has molded me as a human being. It's taught me valuable life lessons. It's shaped how I see the world, and I think for the extreme better. So I do what I do is almost like I owe the game forever. I'm forever indebted to the game of basketball, and I will treat it with the respect that it deserves. And so wherever that takes me,
that's a great point. That is such a great point, and it's a point that gets lost. Now, I want to just for one moment, I'm gonna kind of take a little pause because we have two giveaways today, John. And so we're about halfway through the show. I'm glad that the people are tuning in, and we're going to do our very first giveaway. Now, that giveaway is this incredible Celtics calendar, right? And I'm going to tell you it's a 2021 daily sports calendar, sits on your desk, that has a fact or trivia on every page. And we're going to give this away, and I'm holding it up. I don't know if you guys can really see it. I'm sitting in front of a green screen, and there's a lot of green on this, so some of it may look transparent. But this is a desk calendar. So for everybody who's watching right now, if you're watching live, I want you to really pay attention because we're going to do a bit of a trivia. And how you answer is going to be through the chat. I can see everyone's chat, everyone who's looking right now. So we're going to give you a question. We're going to say hi to our good friend, Brian Fox, while we're doing it. I know, John, you remember Brian.
I remember Brian. What's going on, man?
Brian's good. He's probably looking at my graphics and he's not happy. But I'm doing the best that I can right now. I'm doing the best I can. But Brian, thank you so much for tuning in. But we're going to do this contest. And basically, I'm going to ask you a question. I want to say hello to my young cousin, the Hawk, Hakeem Mance. Now, let me just tell you, John, while I have Hakeem up. Hakeem is a hoopster himself. And I would like to get you two guys together and just talk hoops. And he's another tall guy. I'm so envious of the tall guys, of the guys who just, God said, look, go hoop, right? I had to always be like the scrappy player and the hustle player. You guys can just be the tall, good-looking guys. So,
well, we know that there's no tall Hakeems ever in the NBA. So good luck.
No, but for those who are watching right now and watching live, guys, this is for this desk calendar. We're gonna do the book. We're gonna do John's book a little bit later. So if you don't win this time, stay here with me. But this is for the desk calendar. And so the question is, which Celtics coach had the highest winning percentage? That's the question. So if you can go into your chats right now and you know the answer to which Celtics coach had the highest winning percentage, the first person who comes through in the chats with the right answer, either A, B, C, or D, will win this calendar. So I'm gonna continue with our conversation, but the question I will keep up. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit on you, John, and talk to you about your book.
Sure.
This was a long time coming, I know. And I know that you poured yourself into it. I also know, or maybe I don't know, but this is my takeaway, but in looking at the book, it's designed to spark debate.
Yes. Yes.
Hold on. Wait a minute. So, because I've been looking at my chats. Hold on. Before we go, we finally have a correct answer. So let me just acknowledge that. So hold that thought. I'm very sorry about that, John, but I want to make sure I get the right answer. As soon as it popped up, I wanted to show it. So, the question again was, which Celtics coach had the highest winning percentage? And Ian Cozier, he guessed Casey Jones. And Ian, you are correct. Casey Jones guided the Celtics to championships in 84 and 86. The team won the Atlantic Division in all 5 of Jones's seasons as head coach and reached the NBA Finals in 4 of 5 years as coach. He retired from coaching with a record of 308 and 102, a 751 winning percentage. And I want to say that we lost Casey Jones just a couple of weeks ago, unfortunately. And that was sad because he actually, John, I don't know if you knew this, but I grew up in Natick, and when Casey Jones was a player, he lived in Framingham. So my parents were, I won't say they were friends with him, but they were in the same social circles back in those days.
Wow.
And so I think it was Christmas Day he passed away. It was really sad. And my parents, who I was with that day, were, kind of reminiscing about those days. And we're talking about a lot of years ago when he was a player, the early 70s. Knowing him and knowing his wife and family at that time. So a sad loss to the basketball world. Casey Jones, I know we just recently lost Tommy Heinsohn. And I know you, as someone who's been around the Celtics a little bit, and I've worked around the Celtics a little bit too in my PR days, the Celtics are really good about keeping former players, they call them legends, keeping them around, keeping them involved. So I know you've crossed paths with some of the Celtics legends pretty regularly.
Yeah. I mean, I talked to Tommy Heinsohn over the summer, which was a great. I talked to Tommy for about an hour about just all sorts of basketball. I asked him for like 15 minutes, and we just kept on going. When we got to a certain point, I was like, "Do you want to stop?" He's like, "Nah, let's go." So that was great.
Yeah, no, that's great. That is great. And I know, as I said, I worked with the Celtics when I was in PR, and a lot of the stuff I did was community-based. So going out to schools and going out and doing appearances, and there was always a good group of Celtics who the organization could tap to show up at a school, to show up at an event, to do a signing, to go and visit a hospital, and it's really something that the Celtics do an incredible job with, and I know that you being around the team know that to be true too.
Yes, yeah. The history is so important with the Celtics. It's really important for them to keep these guys around from prior generations, not just as a way to show players like, hey, here's Dave Cowens, here's Robert Parrish, or Larry Bird, or whomever. It's a matter of showing players what it was like in these prior eras, because it wasn't that long ago that players were flying commercial flights. It wasn't that long ago that players were in the middle of a racial element that nearly tore the league apart. There are players who are still alive that were refused service in the 60s. And for a lot of these players nowadays who, thanks to these guys before them, walk into the league and make millions of dollars right away without playing a single second, they're the forefathers. They're the ones who laid the groundwork for this. So it's important for these players to see what these other guys, these legends, did for them, because at some point the Jason Tatums and Jaylen Browns of the world will hopefully come around to future Celtics generations and impart whatever knowledge they've learned from the game today. I mean, it's also important to pass along the knowledge of, hey, when you make this much money playing basketball, these are the pitfalls. These are the things that you're going to face that our forefathers didn't face. There are problems that come along with a $190 million contract. You find cousins that you didn't know. You find friends that you didn't know. So you have challenges. Antoine Walker does a great job with the league educating incoming rookies about his story of losing his entire fortune to having a large entourage and gambling and things like that. So there are always lessons to pass down to future generations.
So you talked a little bit about the older guys still being around and the differences in the old game versus the new game. One of the things that's really almost brand new is kind of the reason that I'm in the setting that I'm in right now, right? Fans aren't in the arenas right now. I watched the game last night, and they mentioned that it was a Lakers-Grizzlies game. They mentioned that they allowed a few fans into the arena, but until then, I didn't know that there were any fans in any arena. Not like football, where depending on the state, depending on the team, depending on where they are, some have a few fans, some have no fans. But the NBA pretty much across the board had no fans. Maybe there's some exceptions now. So the work that you do now is actually even more important than ever before, because I think you guys can sit in the halo, but I don't think that you have the same access to the team that you did before.
When I can go to the home games, actually I can go to the road games too, but I don't. But I go to the home games, and I can actually sit in my same media section, which is in the that lower bowl area, the section 19, I think it is. Mm-hmm. But we're in our plexiglass cubicle type of looking thing. Obviously masks all the time. As soon as you walk in the door, we have to sign. Every time I walk in the door, I have to sign a certain protocol that tells, I agree to certain things in the league. Everything is very, very different. But I can't go down to the floor like I used to. I can't talk to anybody face to face. Even when I'm in the arena, it's a Zoom call with the players after the game. It's a Zoom call with the coach. So I don't have that same level of access at all. We have to make do. So, I mean, even a lot of guys are choosing not even to go to the games because, you go and you have to go through all of this stuff just to have the same thing that you can do at home. So, but at the same time, I'm thankful that we at least get that and we can talk to guys. It's different. It's a challenge, but hopefully it's just a temporary challenge.
So I started to ask you a little bit earlier about your book, because your book is really, it's really interesting, right? I want you to describe the premise, but my impression right away is that I look at this book and then I'm picking this book up, not to hate read it, but to immediately disagree with what you've come up with in your conclusions. Like, wait a minute, how can you pick this person or that person? So I want you to describe the premise, and then I want you to describe how you sort of reached the conclusions that you did. I don't want you to give away the conclusions, but I want you to describe how you reached the conclusions, the premise, the conclusions, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. So I was approached by Lions Press to write the book. They have this series called The All-Time All-Stars for every team. They have one for the Green Bay Packers. They might have a couple of others. So they asked me about doing one for the Boston Celtics. So it's okay, sure. Now, when I was approached by this, because this was the second one and the first NBA book that they did. So I kind of got to lay the groundwork and create my own formula for this. And so I thought, well, if it's an all-star team, I should treat it like the selection of an all-star team, where you have your starting five, and I have backups for all of those starting five. It's a 12-man team. I didn't have to make a 12-man team, but I made it a 12-man team because that's what the all-star team is. So basically 2 players from each position and 2 wild card reserves that can play any position. And then I added 2 coaches just for the fun of it. And so the Celtics history runs all the way back prior to the NBA. It goes back into the BAA, the Basketball Association of America, before it merged with the National Basketball League and created the National Basketball Association. The Celtics existed before that merger. So their history is NBA history. And that began as an 8-team league. It was not fully integrated. The rules were so significantly different. And I had to try to weigh the players who played in that era against players who play today. It's a much more competitive league, obviously, and you have to try to figure out, like Bob Cousy, who was basically the league's first superstar. Mm-hmm. What did he do that made him that superstar? What influence did that era have? And then would his skill set have translated to today? And I will give away, pretty obviously, Bob Cousy makes the team. But
yeah,
it's a hard kind of comparison to make, because you look at something like how many assists he averaged. Well, the assist was awarded much differently back then than it is today. Back then, it had to directly lead to a basket. The player dribbled, right? Forget it. You didn't get the assist. Now we see a guy get the ball at the 3-point line, take 2 dribbles, make a move, lay it up, and that is an assist. So you have to compare the numbers. So some players who have similar numbers to Cousy, I weigh Cousy's numbers back then a little higher when it comes to assists. I don't weigh something like his field goal percentage as high, because the game back then was jacking up shots as many as you can. Teams took 120, 130 shots a game. Now they're taking 80 or 90 shots a game. 100 shots a game is like, wow, you were really fast-paced. Back then, they were really flying, and guys weren't shooting as well. So mechanics were different. All that is to say that I spent a lot of time looking at the most successful era in Celtics history and trying to figure out which of those players were really, truly the greatest of the great. And was there anybody in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond that could compare to that? And that really, honestly, was my biggest challenge, trying to see what influences were in each era and how that impacted these players. And so a book that on the surface looks like it's just a statistical debate between everybody is also half history lesson.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, but that's the one thing, is that I picked up the book, and the book is available everywhere, right? And I picked it up and I started to go through it. But I realized this is a gift book. This book that you see right here is the book that I'm sending when we do our giveaway. So I didn't want the thing to be dog-eared when I sent it off to people. So what that tells me is I have to go out and get another copy, which I will. But just the immediate premise of, someone's all-time list versus what I think is my what is my all-time list, right? And our friend Ian, he says Cousy's game transcends time, right? It's really hard to take Bob Cousy, who was probably all of 5 foot whatever, white
There's
guy,
like 6'3", yeah.
Oh, was he 6'3"? Okay, so you
6'2".
know better than I. So and 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 put him in today's game and not be able to and be able to kind of do the figure out the translation, right? Bob
Yeah,
Cousy to maybe some of the younger generation gets lost in translation, right? It's like you look at this guy, it's like there's no way he could play today,
right.
right? The
Because you look
athleticism,
at
the
YouTube,
size.
yeah, you look at the YouTube clips, and YouTube does people a disservice. It does the legends a disservice because, and just to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like just for Kuzi, you see the clips of him like dribbling the ball, and you're like, if he dribbled like that today, he'd get it stripped. Like he could never play today, but you couldn't back then put your hand on the side of the ball like they do nowadays. So Kyrie Irving, who has the best handles in the league, would go back there and have 15 turnovers in his first game because as soon as he tried to do a crossover with his hand on the side of the ball, it would be a carry. So you transfer Kyrie Irving magically to that era, he would have to dribble the same way that Kuzi did. And Kuzi, as well as he handled the ball back then, you put him in a time machine and bring him here and you say, oh yeah, you can put your hand on the side of the ball. He'd be like, whoa, I can? All right. Now
This is a new game. If I can put my hand on the side of the ball, it's a brand new game. So our friend Tony said that he met Bob Cousy in elementary school. He did some drills with them, and he was, quote unquote old then, but still had it, right? Still, I mean, hoopers. I mean, the saying, game recognizes game, right?
Yeah.
If Bob Cousy showed up at your neighborhood playground. Maybe he couldn't play with you, but he could probably show you or tell you a couple of things that would instantly resonate and say, wait, this guy knows hoops.
Yep. You know right away the skills diminish, right? The body betrays you and eventually you get old and whatever. But when you have that level of skill in anything, that part never really goes away. He can always do a couple of little things where he shows you that little flash. You're like, oh yeah. Or they talk about the game in a certain way where you're just like, oh, I understand. I understand what level he's at. It's youth and ignorance. And because I know I sound old, but because a lot of these kids, they just don't know. They haven't had this life experience. They have a disrespectful view of the past. And whenever you're in this immediacy of today's game, you tend to hype it up because that's what you know the most. So it's hard to look back at those other clips and understand. And that's really why I tried with this book to go back and understand the rules differences and why the game was so different, because adding that context to the statistics makes you understand why certain players may have been even better than what you saw. And especially in the 60s, you're adding another layer of context to the social side of things, where the NBA is a league that travels around the country and they're adding black players to their teams. And the Boston Celtics with Casey Jones and Sam Jones and Bill Russell are traveling for games and being told, you can't stay here. You can't eat here. You can't be this way. You can't, like, all of these things that they face, these abhorrent things that they face, have an impact. When I'm looking at the basketball players that they were, it could very easily have a negative impact. They could very easily be like, you know what? I'm not dealing with this, or it's going to impact my game. And these guys used it to rise up. Bill Russell used that racism to rise up and say, oh, a black man can't do this? Watch what a black man can do. And he fueled him. And that really, really is part of that matters to me. That matters when I watch what Casey Jones did and what Sam Jones did. And that is an element that these guys don't face today. And so,
well, I'm going to tell you, I sound like an old man when I say this, but I don't think that these young kids who are playing now could deal with even an ounce of what those old school players had to go through just to play the game, right? And
Right.
my cousin says, I feel my knees fading, but my jump shot is still there, right? I think everybody who's ever played basketball and gets a little bit of age on them, they still sort of, like if I gave you a basketball right now, John, and I put you on
Yep.
the court, you'd probably kind of move around. And then after a while, you'd say, you know what? I still
Yeah.
kind of got it,
Yep.
right? You
Yep.
know, every basketball player, but that's what you were talking about earlier about what basketball gives us, what it does to us, how it makes us think, how it shapes our world, right? With a basketball in our hand, all things are possible, right? That's the beauty of that game. And, you know, I know you played a lot more advanced than I did, but just, you know, if you've ever sort of been in that, you know, where you're just, everything's clicking on the court and you're feeling good and your jumper's dropping and just everything comes into place. That's the beauty of the game that I think people don't understand. Um,
There's
um,
nothing like winning. There's nothing like winning a basketball game and then celebrating in a locker room. And the best part about celebrating in the locker room after a win is that it doesn't matter who anybody is, what their background is. I don't care. Like after a good win, a good team win, everybody's hugging, everybody's loving each other, all the stuff that we just talked about. Like none of that matters, and that's one of the reasons why I love the game.
so my very good friend Sudi, she asked, have you ever been mistaken for Jason Kidd?
Jason Kidd is a comparison that I get a lot. In fact, Jason Kidd. Now, when I was a little bit younger, hey, maybe he's older too, so maybe we've gained the same amount of weight. But I always pointed at Jason Kidd as a comparison, like my NBA comparison, just in that we had the same dimensions. We're both about 6'5". We're both
Yeah.
around 215, 220 when we played. Like I would
Mm-hmm.
tell people, like you call me Big John and all that stuff, and you talk about how tall I am. Go watch Jason Kidd out on the floor, and he's the smallest dude out there. That's how big NBA players are. But yeah, Jason
Right.
Jason Kidd's come around a bit.
No, thank you for that, Sudi. Okay, so we're about to wrap up. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to put up that next. I'm going to put up my next trivia question for everybody. The trivia question is, which player has the most steals in Celtics history? And I'll be checking the comments, and as soon as we get a winner, I will put that person up. So speed does matter. But while we're waiting for that winner, I want you to talk a little bit just about all the ways people can hear you, find you, see you. Talk a little bit about Locked In on Celtics, your podcast, and all the other things you're doing.
Yeah, so the Locked On Celtics podcast is my primary outlet right now, where it's a Monday through Friday podcast, somewhere around 30 to 40 minutes every day. So after every game, you got to give me a weekend off, but I'll give you a Monday through Friday podcast, talk about the games, talk about the thing, whatever is big with the team right now. I'll have some guests on. The Locked On Podcast Network is a big growing podcast network that has podcasts for every team. So sometimes I'll have in hosts for the teams that the Celtics are facing and bring them in so you can get a different perspective. It's been rated the number one Boston Celtics podcast around. So it's I hope a good resource. And if you haven't started listening to it, I would hope that you go ahead and subscribe. My writing, I'm back on redsarmy.com for my writing for the time being. I'm still covering the team on a regular basis. I'm still talking to the players and Brad Stevens and all of that. So I'm still covering the team. And then on Twitter's my main source of interaction with people, redsarmy_John. I am on Twitter constantly. I've basically become a Twitter addict. And it's a great way to kind of interact with people, and people like love to ask me questions, and I love to answer questions and just kind of have conversations on social media that way.
Well, John, again, what you've done with your career and what you continue to do, I am so impressed. I really, really am,
Right.
because I can't tell you how many people I talk to who say, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I say, well, then just start. There's nothing stopping you, right? When we started in the business, when we were together in the business 20 years ago, just to have a camera of any quality was cost prohibitive. Just to have any sort of access to editing equipment or editors or anything like that, none of that stuff was available to us. So if you really wanted to be someone who was in the media, you had to have a lot of resources available to you, either through your school or you were paying a lot of money for equipment or access to equipment. And now, if you want to start a blog, you can write it today, post it today, and get reaction today. If you want to do a video, you can get your video. You can get your phone. You can get and start a video right now. So I want to just update. We do have a winner, and the answer to the question, which player has the most steals in Celtics history? It is Paul Pierce with 1,583 steals. He has a few more than Larry Bird, and then Rajon Rondo and Robert Parrish, surprisingly, as a center. Those are your top 4 all-time Celtics in leaders in steals. So my cousin, there's no nepotism here, but my cousin did choose C, and he's going to win the book. So I wanted you guys to talk to each other, and maybe this will be a good opportunity for you guys to talk about the book. Maybe we can even arrange it so that John, you can sign it for him. We'll figure that out.
Absolutely.
I wasn't gonna do it for everybody. I didn't want to throw it out there, but my cousin, of course, he wins, and so we'll try to figure that out. We'll get a signed copy for you, Hakeem. But John, final question before we wrap up, and I want to again thank you so much for your time. How far did the Celtics go this year? Like, that's a question you probably get all the time, but I'm gonna frame it like this. Define for me and for my audience what a successful Celtics season looks like this year, and what maybe a disappointing season is. We all know that every team has the goal of winning a championship. So, maybe it's championship or bust, but from your perspective, which is a great one with great insight, define this Celtics season in terms of success and disappointment.
Yeah, I don't think they have to win a championship this year, but they're getting pretty close to. I mean, this should be the first year of like real, true, honest contender for the Boston Celtics. Here are the problems with the Celtics this year. They don't have Kemba Walker right now. The short turnaround really hurt them because they were planning on Kemba going through this stem cell treatment with his knee and coming back some point in January, February. They were planning on the league starting around MLK Day. And they quickly pivoted to Christmas week. And so that month cost the Celtics a lot because the not only the Kemba treatment, but players didn't have the same offseason to work on their games and add stuff to their games. They're doing that on the fly. The rookies are having some issues. Well, one of the rookies is having an issue. Peyton Pritchard's actually playing pretty good. But there's not the same level of preparation. So they're kind of learning a lot of things on the fly. At the same time, the short turnaround also hurt the Gordon Hayward situation. They didn't have the same amount of time to properly scan the landscape. Hayward made a quick decision. Free agency happened very, very quickly. So they got what's known as the traded player exception instead of actual players for Hayward. So there's a delayed reaction now for who the Celtics might get for Gordon Hayward. So I don't know how first of all, how Kemba Walker comes back and looks. I don't know who the Celtics get for Gordon Hayward. So there's a wide swath of difference for what this Celtics team can face. If Kemba Walker comes back and is his old self, and if the Celtics use this traded player exception and get a good quality wing player to come off the bench, now the Celtics are a serious contender to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, maybe even the NBA Finals. However, if Kemba Walker comes back and is not fully healthy and is just never going to be his old self, if he's going to be a shell of himself, and if nothing materializes with this traded player exception, then the Celtics could be looking at a second round exit, maybe even a first round exit. And a first round exit would be the most disappointing scenario because you're looking at Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown playing their best basketball of their career so far. You don't want to waste those years very often. And so I think it's imperative for the Celtics to get another person in, another player to help off the bench, and do whatever they can for Kemba Walker's knee to be 100%, because that's their best chance. And the more that this team is a contender, the more down the road when Jaylen Brown's next contract is up, he's going to want to stick around. And that's part of the thought process as well.
Oh, well, that is a great analysis. I know that the Celtics hold a special place, I think, sort of in fandom and media, where people are reluctant to criticize them. They always kind of, I mean, I know, I'm sure you hear the criticism of, Danny Ainge did this or didn't do this, or the team is this or the team is that. But I think, when you really look at it and you look at this team, the Celtics, as an entity in the NBA, they're part of NBA royalty. But the reality is that they have, one championship since 1987, right?
Yeah.
But still a very relevant team, a very, focused in on team, and still get basically a pass here in this town. I think people are rooting for them and want them to do well. And I think I'm not an expert like you, but I feel like they have some great pieces in place, but still need a little bit more to get over the top, right? Aside from, I think, Tristan Thompson, there's nobody on that team with any championship experience. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then last year there was nobody, right? Right.
And so getting Thompson was a priority, I think, partly because of that, and because of the way that Cavaliers team won the championship, to come back from 3-1 down after the Celtics had blown so many leads to the Miami Heat, to have somebody win a championship and beat that Warriors team, I think was very important. The Celtics, I think that sometimes the Celtics history does this team a disservice, because today's NBA, any one thing that goes wrong is so magnified. Whereas in the past, you could make moves and go over salary cap, and the luxury tax wasn't as punitive, and player movement wasn't as much as it is now. The Kyrie Irving thing, I think, hurt the Celtics, set them back. Losing that Gordon Hayward injury set them back. It's harder to recover in today's NBA. So I think Danny Ainge has done pretty well, and part of why the criticism might not be as loud for him is because he's made moves that on the surface you say, okay, that makes sense. And then Kyrie Irving does something like leave the season after he says, I'll stay here if you'll have me. And then Al Horford, out of nowhere, decides to go to Philly for a contract the Celtics were never going to offer him. And Gordon Hayward decides he's going to leave and go to Charlotte for a contract that they were never going to offer him. And neither of those guys seem to be, at that point in their careers, worth that much money. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, somebody comes in and offers it. It changes the dynamic a lot. And because of the salary cap rules and the luxury tax rules and a lot of different things now with the collective bargaining agreement, it's just harder to recover from this kind of stuff, especially once you start having to pay your young guys the amount of money that they require to stick around. So it's very complicated. This isn't the days of Red Auerbach trading the ice capades for Bill Russell. This is a very complicated collective bargaining agreement, and it's tough. It's tough to recover when things don't go the way you thought they were going to go.
Well, I can say one thing that has gone the way that I wanted it to go was spending an hour with you talking basketball, talking about your book, talking about your ascendancy in the media. This has been a fantastic pleasure for me, and I can't thank you enough, John, for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
So, guys, I want you guys, this is how you get in contact with John. This is how you take in his content. He is locked in on the Celtics and basketball And as you can see here, he's a great guy. John, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the Wednesdays at 1 show. I want to encourage everybody to pick up John's book. It's available at Amazon and Barnes & Nobles and every place you can get books. Go and pick this book up. It's an incredible book. I want you guys to listen to his podcast, Locked On Celtics, and follow him on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. However you follow people, please. Really, if you are a basketball fan, if you are a Celtics fan, this is a guy you want to pay attention to. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to my audience. I want to thank you guys so much for watching this week's Wednesday at 1. I'll see you guys next week.